Forgot to record. Glad I put that in there so I could remember. Hopefully it is recording. Yes, good. So we will record today's webinar so you can access it later if you so choose. And then I'm showing this at the beginning, but will be at the end as well. If you could take a couple minutes after today's webinar and just do a really short online survey for us, we would greatly appreciate it. It really helps us as we move forward and think about what the state needs and what your areas and regions need in terms of transition. So those are my logistics to get started. And I want to start by introducing you to someone. Most of you around the state know the name Teresa Grassi. Teresa has been our boss for many years. She actually started the Center on Community Living and Careers 19 years ago and has pretty much been the face of transition in Indiana for a long time. Teresa has taken a new position and we have welcomed a new director. Wanted you to see a picture of her and recognize her name. This is Judith Gross, and she joined us August 1st, and she came to us from Kansas. And we are thrilled to have her on board. As you start getting information from the Secondary Transition Resource Center as well as CCLC, you will see her name attached to that. So just want to make sure that you see who she is, what she looks like, and recognize her name. Here's what the agenda is going to look like today. We are going to talk about some statewide data. We're going to talk about how Indicator 13 or transition IEPs are monitored. Then we're really going to get into things about what we learned about during the past year about transition, kind of try to clarify some things that we've seen as we look at transition IEPs. And then hopefully you can either chat your questions or we can answer questions afterwards. We are also going to give a quick update on the certificate of completion and the general diploma status. Yes. Actually, a new site came out this morning from the DOE, and I'll share that with you as well. We will also have a quick conversation about order of selection and pre-employment transition services, because those are impacting the state of transition in the state of Indiana. And then we'll also look at any kind of supports and resources that you need. Here's somebody having breakfast or turning pages. So again, if you could mute your microphone, that would be wonderful if you are out and about. So we're going to get started. Kelly, I'm going to let you interrupt me if you see critical questions come through. If not, I'll try to pull up the chat occasionally and look at it if I can multitask that well this morning. So we will see. But again, thank you for being here. We have a phenomenal group of people dedicated to transition across the state of Indiana, and I am honored to get the opportunity to work with so many of you. So let's start by talking about outcomes. And I know we all kind of hear that probably more than we want to, but one of the things that we look from our center is every year as our districts are writing transition IEPs, we're looking and seeing whether or not the message is getting across, whether or not we're writing compliant transition IEPs, and then also looking at how that converts to quality. So if you are not in charge of monitoring or you don't care about monitoring, go to your happy place for the next few minutes. But we're going to talk about what that's looked like for us. We have been tracking data for several years to see what our compliance looked like. So I want to look at 2016-17. To start with the bottom row. And basically what this shows us that if you go to the right side, when federal data, when data got submitted to the DOE for federal reporting in 2017, those districts that were monitored were 82% compliant with their transition IEPs. The 51% you see preceding that, that's where those same districts were before they had a year of technical assistance, training, feedback, some systemic work in your local districts. So what we're finding out is that this proactive data doesn't look so great. And that is kind of the raw data prior to you doing some intense work with transition IEPs. But the data the following year after getting supports grows immensely. So we've kind of been trying to figure out how can we help districts be more consistent with compliance? Because nobody wants to do the roller coaster ride. We're great now, we're bad now, we're great now. So we've been looking at what the data is telling us. And one of the things we're seeing is that districts who do exactly what you guys are doing this morning, come to regional trainings, are part of a transition cadre, ask for supports during their proactive time, we've seen a significant increase in compliance. And on the opposite side, I guess what you would expect is people who are not reaching out, who are not taking that initial data and saying, what do we need to do differently, are really not making any sustainable change. And in my mind, one of the things we're looking for is that sustainable change. How do we stay at a high level of compliance? Because when we can do that, then we can really look at a high level of quality. But we also step back and say, what are the things right now in our state that are really impacting compliance? And these are not a surprise to many of you. One of the biggest issues that we're seeing is the high rate of teacher turnover. Emergency permits, first-year teachers, people moving from elementary to secondary. So we're seeing a real impact in inconsistency when you're trying to retrain or do new training every year for students. Another thing we're seeing is that smaller districts, Indiana's got a lot of rural small places, I live in one, is in small districts where there isn't an internal level of support, meaning that I can write IEPs all year long and really never know if they were compliant or not, is really impacting that overall compliance. And then the third one, which is one I think probably that we have the most level of impact on, is just that lack of good foundational knowledge. And that meaning, again, new people, your coordinators, your administrators, everybody understanding what's intended in a transition IEP. And today is not a transition IEP 101, but if you feel like you need that, please let me know and we'll make sure that happens. This is more of a big picture webinar, and we did a breakout in the on-site trainings of new to transition. And if that's something you think you would like a webinar for those brand new people, we can do that as well. This part of it is going to be kind of a bigger picture view of it. So this is, again, maybe not important to some of you, but I also think it's just important to have that level of awareness. There are all of these indicators that the state of Indiana monitors. And indicator 13, which is a transition IEP, is one of them. So if you look at the bottom row on the left-hand side, you're going to see the years that indicator 13 is monitored. Your district's also being monitored procedurally, and they're also looking at post-secondary outcomes. Now, every 3 years, your transition IEPs are randomly pulled to see if they're compliant. And these numbers, again, may not mean anything to a lot of you, but at least a level of awareness I think is important. Those numbers mean that that's the group you are in. Every school district's assigned to a rotation or a group, and the group you're in determines what's happening that year. So again, don't worry too much about that. Just know that it exists and that every third year you are being monitored for compliance with your transition IEPs. So what's happened in the past is that you have had a year before to do some work, you get some feedback, and then the following year, your transition IEPs go to the Department of Education. This year, we're going to start doing something a little bit differently. So could someone could you mute your audio, please? Thank you. So this year, we're going to do it differently to give you a little extra time. So in the past, you would have had time from May to fix your transition IEPs. And anybody that's had us come in, sometimes it doesn't happen early in the year. So sometimes we don't get there till December or January, and then by May, everything has to be accurate. So what we're going to do, again, I just want you to have a blush of awareness because your directors will know this, is that starting with this year's group, you will have a year and a half to make your IEPs compliant. And that's kind of critical because in the past you sort of had proactive year, federal year, nothing. And that nothing year we found has kind of killed our compliance data and our sustainable change. So now what will happen is you'll have a year and a half proactive, your year federal, and then you'll just have a few months to sort of regroup. So what this is going to do is it's going to keep transition IEP sort of at our forefront all the time. So we're hoping that that will lead to sustainable change and also lead to better quality. So if you are an administrator and you're watching this, or you're a director, or you're a department chair and you're intimately aware of this monitoring process, the next few slides are for you. And it basically says that whichever group you're in, it shows your progression. So if you are in group 2, which is the next group up, instead of having your information pulled in May of 2018, it will be pulled in December, and you will have from January of 2017 until May of 2019 to do any kind of internal training you need, to ask for outside support, but it gives you really a good solid chunk of time to work with teachers, both new and veteran. So that's just kind of where we're heading. So what I included in here, because I want to make sure that everybody who needs it has it, is the timeline for every group. So you can find out what group you're in, and you can see what your next status is for indicator 13 monitoring. So that's just there for your viewing pleasure later. One of the questions we get, though, and I think this is important for district folks to be aware of, is that while you're in your proactive time, which now again is 1.5 years instead of several months, you can get free of charge supports. So if you are in that proactive status and you want somebody to come in and work with your teachers, if you need resources, if you just need some one-to-one coaching, those are available to you through the Secondary Transition Resource Center. And I just wanted to put a slide here so you knew what to do. So if you feel like you need supports, you just shoot me an email. I shoot you back a little request form, you fill that out, and then we talk about what your district needs. Doing a lot of virtual coaching this year, which is actually being very successful. So instead of taking up all your time doing things during your PLC time or your professional development time, department meetings. But I just want to make sure, we want to make sure you knew that supports are there for you if you feel like you're really struggling with the transition IEP process. If you're curious about more information about that whole monitoring rotation, here's the site. It's all public information. Here's the site on the Department of Ed's website that shows you every district in the state of Indiana and what rotation bucket you're in and when your indicators are monitored. So now that that's clear as mud, any questions that you want to throw out about that? I'll wait like 60 seconds. I pulled the chat box up. So if there's anything there you want to toss out before we get to the real meat of our stuff. All right. Let me know if something comes up, Kelly. So let's move on. Let's talk about what's happening. And again, today's webinar is not the start to finish transition IEP process. It is really the what's happening now process. So what's happening in our state. So every year we look back and say, of the, I don't know, we read about 1,500 transition IEPs a year. We say, what kind of trends are we seeing? What kind of progress are we seeing? How can we best provide information and supports? So this year, we really saw lots of great progress, actually over the last couple of years. So to start with, the kudos, pat on the back, is that we are definitely now conducting age-appropriate transition assessments. And that's awesome. Is that me? Okay. We are also summarizing that information. So when we get that information, we have an understanding now that we have an obligation to say, we gave this assessment and here's what we found out. And then the other thing that we're really on point with is writing strong I will statements, those post-secondary goals. So kudos to all of you, because we feel like those messages have come across pretty loud and clear. So we can say that we are starting to get a good handle on those. But as everything, when we go forward, we tend to go back a little bit. So here's kind of my big thing this year, I guess my mantra, because everybody wants to write quality. We don't just want to write compliance. And the thing that I see that's sort of getting in our way sometimes of breaking down the compliance door, is remembering in the transition IEP to stay very student focused. And I know the comments that we get a lot, and I appreciate it and certainly understand it, is I've got all these kids, how do I make everyone look different? So before we start talking about specifics this morning, I just want to revisit the whole purpose of transition planning and how we can really keep ourselves more focused on each individual student. So if we think about it, and remember that transition is not an event. It's not something that happens every year, 2 weeks before my case conference. Transition is something that happens year round. And it's all about saying, here's my student, and this is what I know about them. And then saying, here's the same student, and here's where they would like to get to. And transition planning is all about figuring out what else we need to know to either help them make an informed decision on the path that they think they want to be on, or sometimes help them move their cheese. So sometimes we get really caught up in writing the same thing because it's what's available in our school for our students during that time. And we're actually too hard on ourselves, because if we just let ourselves think about the path that student's on and where they're trying to get to, we can really individualize our transition IEPs. And it's not more work, it's more intentionality. So we're going to talk about those things right now that are getting in the way, I think, of that intentionality of transition planning for our kids. So moving forward, we decided this year we were going to have the big three. And we really looked at the three areas that we truly need to revisit to stay student focused, to keep that transition IEP individualized, and to really bring meaning to our kids and to bring them to the table during this planning process. So these are the three things we're going to talk about this morning. We're going to talk about how to better individualize age-appropriate transition assessments. We're going to talk about skill-based measurable goals, but not as long as you probably are going to want to, so I apologize that we can't spend the whole morning on that. Actually, I don't know if I apologize. It's probably good we can't. But we're going to talk about how to make more skill-based goals. And then we're really going to talk about one of my favorite things, which is that underutilized transition services and activities, and how we align them and also keep them individualized at the same time. All right. I'm going to pull up chat real quick to see if there was any specific questions. Thanks, Kelly, for monitoring that. Okay, so we're going to kind of approach this on what we're seeing and what we should see, and then we're going to talk about some examples. So when we talk about age-appropriate transition assessments, like I said, kudos because we're giving them, but we're starting to see a little bit of a trend of every student getting the same assessment. So everybody gets ABC high school transition assessment. Doesn't matter my grade level, doesn't matter my disability area, or what we already know. Everybody gets this assessment because it's what we have available. And then we're also seeing assessments that are giving us the same information year after year. So every year we're asking those, you know, what do you want to do? Where do you want to live? Do you need any schooling for that? So we're getting sort of the same outcome with consistent assessments. So how would that look different? What we should see are transition assessments that are chosen based upon what is my current post-secondary goal. So here's where I want to get to. Remember, think about that three-tier we talked about. Where am I at? Where am I trying to go to? And what do we have to do in between? They should also be chosen based upon, again, what we still need to find out. And they should be as authentic as possible. So what does this mean? It means that we have to follow the path of the student. So if I give you an assessment and I find out in your post-secondary goal statements that this is what you want to do, our obligation is to find an assessment that helps us find new information to help that student make the determination if they're on the right path. So again, we can't just have a packet. Here's the packet for freshmen, here's the packet for juniors and seniors, and here's the packet for sophomores. We have to say it's fine to have your go-tos, your go-to assessments, the ones you like to use. but it should always be about what new information we need to find out. Several years ago, I talked to a bunch of juniors and seniors, and their number one complaint was, everybody asks me the same questions. So the counselor asks them, the teacher of record asks them, I'm sure parents are asking them, they probably did it in another class. So one of the big things about transition assessments to think about is what's already happening. Okay, so what's already happening in my school building or in my life that brings new information to the table. So what that would look like for us is we would see assessments go from general to more specific. So you middle school teachers, yes, you do a lot of general, finding out strengths, preference, interests, needs, excuse me, helping kids realize what they like and what they don't like. So at middle school, it's a lot of generalities. At the same time, when you have that middle schooler that's known since they were in first grade what they want to do, we want to start as early as we can, helping them become more specific with the information that they're sharing with us, with the information that we're assessing. Okay, so we're going to go from general to more specific. We also, it should look like, again, not cookie cutter. So we talked about the package. You can have things you like, but not every junior should take the same assessment. The assessments that I get or that you utilize should be based upon what you need to find out about me. And new assessments every year. So it's okay to review sometimes, especially with independent living and some of those types of things. Hang on a second, I gotta clear my throat. But it shouldn't be just a review of last year's employment assessment. Okay, so let's think about this for a second. So think about what you currently do with your assessments, and think about what we know about our kids, and think about what else might be available. So one of the things that I'm going to send to you after the result of all our regional on-sites, I'm going to send you a general ed questionnaire. And some schools have been using this, and what it does is it finds out what's already happening. Who's already doing interest inventories? Who's already doing career research papers? Who's already, bringing guest speakers in so kids can look at different career options? What's already happening in school so we don't have to, so we can supplement, not supplant. Because again, we want this transition process, this planning process, to be kind of a natural event. So what's happening during the year that helps me better understand my student and the path that they're on. It also helps when you think about kids who have what we sometimes deem not realistic goals. It's not my purview, my right, my anything to tell somebody they can't do something. But what my obligation is as a teacher is to help them explore what that do something means. So do they really understand what that career takes as far as education? Do they understand what that career takes as far as characteristics and personal responsibility? So assessments help kids figure that information out. So again, how do we take that cookie cutter approach and make it more specific for every student? And really it's following the yellow brick road. So we sort of follow the road that they're on. So let's talk a little bit more by using an example. So Kelly sent posted these on the chat room. And Kelly, if you want to repost the age-appropriate transition assessment example, then they could pull it right up. But I also have a clip of it here. So basically, when you think about that age-appropriate transition assessment, it could look something like this. This student early on did things very more general, a career interest inventory, a student dream sheet, and an adolescent autonomy checklist. So this first time we're looking at independent living and employment and education and training. From that information, the student then determines what my I will statements are. So the next series of assessments can become much more authentic and individualized. So the follow-up year, this student did an initial career research sheet based upon what they wanted to do, and a job as shadow experience reflection. Okay, so again, this student wanted to go into retail, So your example is 2 pages if you pull it up, and it's got a front and a back. I don't think I included them both on here. I didn't. A front and a back to show how that flows from year to year. So as soon as you've been broad with me and you've helped me narrow down some things that I want to be, then you can help me start to figure out if that's truly where I want to go. So that's how we take that general information and follow the path of the student to help them become more specific. The thing I love the most about age-appropriate transition assessments that are more authentic and individualized is that it brings students truly to the table much more engaged. So instead of me reporting what you wrote on survey ABCD, you, the student, are reporting on when you went out and talked to that person or did that job shadow, or even when you got online and did a virtual tour or you looked up the characteristics. Now what do you know? Because bottom line, I always say if I could put one poster above every secondary teacher's desk, it would be informed decision making. We're trying to give kids the tools and help them on the path so they can make an informed career choice when they leave us. And what we know right now is that our kids are not that successful in the employment world. So we have to sort of figure a way to bring them more authentically and more engaged to the table to take better control of what their long-term outcomes are going to be. So that's kind of what we're seeing in the world of age-appropriate transition assessments. Again, people are writing summaries, people are giving assessments, so they are meeting the minimal level of compliance. So you're meeting the level of the law if you do that, even if you do a pencil paper every year for 4 years or 6 years, and you are summarizing it, you're meeting that level of minimal compliance. But what we're seeing is that's not leading to more positive outcomes for kids. So this is actually a better bang for your buck. And truly, when you start gathering information, I think that teachers are finding that it's really less, oh my gosh, I got to pull these 6 kids out of class to do a survey. We are all year round saying, what's happening that I can gather that's going to help inform the path that that student's on. So sometimes it's looking around, sometimes it's talking to other teachers, sometimes it's helping kids understand what they can bring to the table. I know a teacher who had her student who was very successful in his employment, but very unsuccessful in school. He brought his employer evaluations to the table as part of his age-appropriate transition assessment. And they had a really great conversation about why he's successful there, what skills he displays there that he doesn't display at school. So again, that's an authentic assessment, but that certainly works here. It doesn't have to be the assessment like we used to think. You know, when we started transition, we said that here's all these things, give them. And now what we found is that those are great and they're great backups, but there's sometimes stuff that's more meaningful that we need to try to gather. So that's kind of the logistics here. Any questions? Because that's a lot of information. Any questions about age-appropriate transition assessments that you want to throw out? No? Okay. What I'm going to do then is I'm going to tell you a couple of questions that have come up regionally, and then we'll move on. The first one is when you're looking at the list of assessments, it is a district decision whether or not you leave all those or whether or not you take them out from year to year. So some people just keep the current ones in, and then other places are leaving each year as they build. So the year before can see what did we use as age-appropriate transition assessments. Totally the district's call. So that's up to your director of special education to make that determination. The same is true for the summary of findings. There are districts who leave all the summary of findings year after year. That is not necessary because this is a present level IEP, but some places choose to do that. My only warning on that is if you leave all the prior years, make sure that you have them dated. So whoever's reading it can sort of get a clear picture. But those are district decisions. What the law says is that we have to have the assessments and we have to have summarized that information. Okay.
Joni, we do have one question that came in.
Okay.
And the question is, so we do not need a transition goal for each section if we decide as a case conference that one is not necessary. I thought we had to do a goal for each.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, let me try to clarify that. We're not talking about goals here. We're talking about assessments. And yes, you have to assess. You always have to assess employment, and you always have to assess education and training. If, when you assess independent living for the first time, you determine that the student does not need a post-secondary independent living goal, you do not need to reassess that every year, but you have to review that every year. So I don't have to keep giving an independent living assessment every year to my students with specific learning disabilities. I just have to restate that that student is fine there. So when we're talking about assessments, we're talking about you have to have something that assesses employment and something that assesses education and training every year. You are always writing the post-secondary I will statements. So the I will statements are a given. So you are either citing evidence, I don't need an independent living post-secondary goal statement, but you're always making an I will statement for employment, and you're always making an I will statement for education and training. Does that answer your question, Kat? Okay, good. Anybody else? Okay, another question. I'm sorry. Another question that came up when we were in regionals, then we're going to move on, was can you have a good assessment that assesses employment and education training? Yes, you can. But make sure that you talk about in your sum of your findings how that assessment addressed employment and how that assessment addressed education and training. So make sure that you're clear that it really did give you more information than what you already knew about that student in those areas. Actually, I said I was done, but if you know me, I'm never done. One more thing. Don't underestimate what you know. So once I've put my employment information from my assessment and my education training information from my assessment, continue to think about what else do you know about that student? What are my strengths and my preferences and my interests and my needs in the areas of employment? Maybe you know that I babysit on the weekend and that I help my dad out in the summers. Once you have that sort of official assessment conducted and summarized, it's okay to add additional information here. Usually when I sit down and talk to teachers, they can give me tons of information about their students, but a lot of times it's not captured in the IEP. So if you have additional information that helps inform, it's okay to use that information as well. This does not just have to be specifically only what I found from that formalized assessment. Okay, so there's the first big three of this year. Thinking about, are we really following the path of the students and individualizing our assessments? Okay, so the next area we're going to talk about is measurable annual goals. And if you were here, I could hear a collective sigh from everybody because measurable annual goals have been kind of a struggle over the last couple of years for folks. We continue to struggle when we look at ESSA and we look at Dear Colleague Letter and how we're making those more standards-based and grade level. So let's talk about just the general picture of measurable annual goals and their alignment to the transition within the transition IEP. What we're seeing is a lot of outcome goals. We're seeing goals that say I'm going to turn in 95% of my work, I'm going to pass my ECA, I'm going to come to school 100% of the time, I'm going to raise my Lexile score or my reading level. Those are outcomes that are definitely measurable, but they're not addressing a skill. Okay, we're going to talk about that in a minute a little more. So think about, are you writing goals that are outcomes? Because though those are hopeful outcomes, we want hopeful outcomes, what we really want are what are the skills that we have to support in the area of special education to help that student make the most meaningful progress in their educational environment. We're also seeing a lot of goals in one statement because we're seeing a lot of, Teresa always called them kitchen sink goals. You know, I'm going to do this and this and this and this and this, and really no way to monitor or measure whether or not those goals were related or which actually led to a better outcome. So a lot of stuff in one statement. And seeing some goals that really don't have a form of how you're going to measure it. So thinking through how you're going to measure what you think the student needs to improve upon. So what's that mean? So what we should start seeing and should be seeing are goals that address a skill that needs specially designed instruction. And I actually really like the addition of that in the Indiana IEP system. It used to say need, and need kind of said, okay, let's blame the kid on what they need. You need to turn in your work. So then we could really lead that to, okay, turn in 95% of your work. But what I always say is, step back and say, what's the skill that needs support or specially designed instruction that will lead to that hopeful outcome? If my wrist isn't broken, I can turn my work in. That doesn't mean it's quality. That doesn't mean I understood the instructions. That doesn't mean that I organized my things beforehand. All it means is I turned it in. So we have to step back and say, what does that student lack in a skill that's going to help with the outcome? Because most of those outcomes transfer into adult life. So most of those things align to what we want kids to do when they're adults. So specially designed instruction, if we write it correctly, really leads to that goal. I always tell people to step back and say, no student ever got in the special ed door because they didn't turn their homework in. Or no student got in the special ed door, because they didn't come to school often enough. So think about what's keeping me from coming to school, what's keeping me from getting my work turned in. That's where we sort of have to drill down and step back and say, what skill do I need to get there? I know, not saying it's easy, because it's kind of a shift in thinking for a lot of people, but it makes more sense if you think about, how am I impacting the life of that student in the instruction that they need? What tools do they need? What skills can I teach them? So what am I doing to impact the outcome? I always called those other ones, they were kind of our osmosis goals. I hope that you go to sleep and tomorrow you turn your work in, because I didn't have any control over it. So I'm just hoping that it happens. So we have to step back and say, what's the skill involved that we can give some instruction for, or we can provide some supports for, or Gen Ed can give the instruction for, to make sure that we're meeting that missing skill set that student has. The other thing is, it should connect back to present levels. What is my biggest barrier? What is keeping me from being successful? So back to everybody's favorite, the homework goal. If it truly is, what's keeping me from being successful is that I don't turn my work in, then we need to drill down, again, turning my work in, and figure out where it's falling apart, and what is it about my work. Because is it an academic skill that I'm lacking, so I don't know how to do it, so I'm not turning it in? Is it an organization or an executive functioning skill that I'm missing, and I need some supports for that? So thinking about, again, what's that connection back to what we said I was doing in my present levels. And then again, an indication of how I'm going to measure that progress. What's that going to look like? So that's what measurable annual goals pretty much should look like. There's lots of ways to write goals. You can write SMART goals. You can write ABCD goals. If you've never seen the book Data Without Tears, it's a phenomenal book. If you will put that in the chat box, Kelly, for me, Data Without Tears by Johnston with a T. It's a great, quick read, helps us kind of drill down goal writing. Again, today can't be a goal writing training, but it can be kind of start thinking. Let's kind of give some form to this whole skill-based. Again, what we want to teach is we want to teach that student who never writes down any due dates how important it is to know when things have to happen. So whether it's using my phone, whether it's, having somebody remind me, a calendar, because that same student's going to leave and not manage their personal health with their appointments. They're not going to manage meetings that they're supposed to attend for work, because they're going to have the same deficit. Again, maybe that lack of organization or that lack of foresight, and it's going to impact them in their employment. Same thing's going to happen for those kids who need reading comprehension. You're not going to probably make me comprehend, but can you give me some tools so when I see text and I have to access it, that I know how to do that? Because those are our kids, and I've had several of these kids who go to their first day on their job in a factory or in a business, and they're given a manual to read, and the next day the kid does what? He doesn't go to work because he can't read it. So are we helping kids then learn the skills of how to access information that they might need? So there's lots of things kind of that revolve around those skill-based goals that our kids need. So as an example, I didn't want to give you goals because that would just create all kinds of chaos. Hopefully you've utilized the Indiana IEP Resource Center. Hopefully you've utilized Project Success, who are great with content connectors and goal writing for kids with more significant needs. If you have not, you need to reach out to those folks that will help with that whole goal writing process. So I tried to think about, okay, what could we add to that mix to support the effort? So what you're going to get, and it was one of your handouts as an example, is just a way to think about it. So all this is a thought process. So instead of giving you a goal bank, sorry, I know everybody wants a goal bank. Instead of a list of goals you can use, it's a way to think about goal writing. So next time you sit down and you're thinking about writing a goal for a student, think about what could it look like if I look at this skill and not just the hopeful outcome. Because this is tripping people up, and we know that across the state. So what can we do to support the thought behind skill-based goals? So I'm going to give you a second to look at that. Talk with your group if you're with a group. Talk to yourself if you're by yourself. Look at that and see if you have some questions that we need to think about.
Choose from and model from. On the that's what it could like. A lot of times the kids may not know things, so we'd have to do that right out.
I'm not sure if you're having a conversation with your group or if you're asking a question, but if you're asking a question, if you would put it in the chat box. If not, you might mute.
Yeah, and I'm not even seeing that person open, Jenny, so I'm not sure.
Okay, they probably muted. I don't hear them now.
I also did not have the handout while they're looking at that, the one you mentioned before that you wanted me to post.
No, you did. Here's the age-appropriate assessments, and here's the goal writing.
Okay, there was an article you said for them to read.
Actually, I'll put it in there right now.
Okay, great.
Okay, as you've talked to your group, any questions, any thoughts about this? I shouldn't ask for thoughts, that could go on. Any questions?
There was one question. What about consult goals and specifically specially designed instruction?
Okay, great question. So again, think about the student that you have that's on consult. And you're right, those drive-by kids are hard to think about sometimes. Think about a couple of things. Are they self-advocating and self-determining? Are they self-monitoring? So is that student able to articulate their disability and their accommodation needs? Does that student communicate regularly with their teachers versus you talking to their teachers? So I always say with those high flyers, those consult kids, think about what's going to take them to the next step, especially if I'm a college-bound student or if I have really high aspirations. The number one thing that really gets in the way of our kids with disabilities, specific learning disabilities, especially at the post-secondary level, is they don't know how to self-advocate. So you might work on just teaching a few self-advocating skills. So could that student ask for their present levels of performance from their teacher versus you doing that? Could that student, is that student asking questions on a regular basis? So instead of, when you're talking to gen ed teachers, for those kids, instead of asking the questions like, what are my grades and am I turning my work in? Think about how is that student participating in the classroom. Again, are they asking questions? Do they work well in groups? Do they get missing assignments done? So think about those high flyers and ways that they can self-regulate. So the specially designed instruction can be, maybe you're just going to teach me about my disability and my accommodations, and then I'm going to be able to articulate that. So think about that next level for kids. A lot of times I know the question is, what about the kid who needs nothing? And of course my flip answer is always that kid shouldn't be in special ed, but I get it. I know there's a lot of outlying layers to that. So think about, again, what takes me to the next level. And it might be just a tiny little thing, but again, if you're identifying it in present levels, even if it's small, but it's my barrier right now, that's what you can address. So specially designed instruction then I think looks a lot like self-regulation. And self-advocacy and self-determination. So I think that's what you're looking at that point. Okay. All right, then we are going to move on to my very favorite area, which is transition services and activities. So here's what has happened so far. We've given age-appropriate transition assessments. We've summarized that information. We've written our I will statements, and now back in provisions in the Indiana IEP are transition services and activities. And these are supposed to be a coordinated set of activities that are helping me determine if I'm on the right path. So what we're seeing right now is a lot of very minimal compliance. A lot of, I'll meet with my guidance counselor, I'll develop my 4-year plan. Yes, those meet the level of minimal compliance, but if we think about our goal in this whole transition planning process, which is to individualize, is that individualizing what that student needs to find out to see if I'm on the right path to make an informed decision about my future. So yes, those meet minimal compliance, but they don't meet a quality standard. We're also seeing all students participating in the same service and activity. Now, I am in no way saying you can't have kids that participate in the same activity. What I'm saying is to make sure that if you are using that activity that every 8th grader does or every sophomore does, if you're using that activity in the narrative, think about what connection that has to my needs. Because just because I do it doesn't mean it supports my post-secondary outcomes. So here's where we have to say, I'm not just going to put the scripted version of everything that we do, but I'm going to look at what is it you need to move forward. I'll try to explain that better in a second. So what we should see is a coordinated set of activities. Much like our assessments, as we're building our assessments, we should be building our services and activities so they are becoming more and more individualized and specific for that student in helping them make their decision. The bottom point here is really important. The narrative in the age-appropriate transition assessment is your best friend in that section because the narrative allows you to say, why did you choose that service and activity? I'll give you an example. You have an 8th grader, and the 8th grader basically says, I hate school, I don't like anything about it, I just want to get a job when I'm out of here, and I don't want to go to any more school. But all of your 8th grade class goes on a college campus visit, because a lot of 8th grade classes do now. So yes, I'm going to go on that college campus visit. Now, to use that as a transition service and activity and to make that alignment back to where I'm trying to get to, because again, we're talking about aligning this IEP, individualizing it. Maybe this student, no one in their family has gone to college. They've never been on a college campus. So maybe for this student, you just want them to have the opportunity to see what it is. Because kids only know what they know. So that narrative allows you to say why this activity, which doesn't make a natural sense back to the student's post-secondary outcomes, makes sense for this student. So use that narrative to talk about why that activity and service is coordinated towards that student's outcomes or post-secondary goals and how it aligns again to that path. So the narrative lets you say, this is why I chose this. And I think that's pretty critical in services and activities. So what they would look like. Much like our transition assessments, they would get more specific every year, because if I stay on the same path, if I'm a student staying on the same path, it allows me to keep building what I know about it. They should always make, again, that solid alignment back to my long-term goals. And here's my favorite part. We would use things that were more authentic. And here's the thing. There is no transition service and activity police right now. We can write them and they can never happen. And really, there's no harm, no foul legally. But if we think about the intentionality and the meaningfulness of services and activities, and we put something on there that's intentional and aligned and meaningful for that student, if we do something that allows me to capture that information, that cycles back around and next year can become my age-appropriate transition assessment. I'm going to give you an example and then we're going to look at some. So an example would be, I want to go into cosmetology. I want to be a cosmetologist. I want to do hair and nails and all that cool girly stuff. So services and activities then should align to how can I help this student figure out if that's what they want to do. So I might start with an activity just that I'm going to research what kind of education I need to have, what kind of skills I need to have, how much experience, what money I'll make. If I can capture that information, which you can, and on the transition assessment matrix that we use, you can find authentic assessments. So I give Sally this piece of paper and say, as you find this information, write it down. So Sally comes back and says, wow, I found out that there's a cosmetology school just 30 miles from my house, and that here's how much money it costs, and in 18 months I can have a job. So she comes back with all of that information as an outcome from the service and activity. All that information that she just learned becomes your assessment, your age-appropriate transition assessment next year. Because what's an assessment do? It builds on the information I know to help me get to my outcome or to move my cheese. So you can take that information, put it in Sally's file. Next year, you come back and Sally talks about what she learned. It's a cycle. Transition's a cycle. So once I've learned that and Sally comes back to the table and says, here's what I did, here's what I know, this is what my assessment, my activity and service taught me. Bottom line is, every year you're trying to get to the okay, Sally, do you still want to be a cosmetologist? So now instead of just saying it because it sounds cool, she is saying it based upon informed information that she was a part of. That's what I love about this whole service and activity and assessment thing. So again, if we use authentic things, we capture the information and we bring it forward, we're in essence already doing that assessment. So I don't have to do a paper pencil assessment with Sally because now I know authentically that she found this out. So in a transition service, what that could look like is, so this year I researched it online. Next year, our Career Center has a program, so I'm going to go visit the Career Center and see about it. Maybe the next year I'm going to go out and I'm going to interview somebody who's a cosmetologist. So when we think about services and activities, think about how am I helping you with that decision-making process? How am I helping you decide if that's the right thing? What's happened in the past, and I did it a lot 20 years ago when I did transition, before we were as informed as we are now, is we would just kind of admire the kid's goal. Okay, you want to be that. All right, good. Okay, you want to be that. Okay, good. Okay, you want to be that. Well, the kid gets to the senior year and finds out, wow, I can't do that. So I love the fact that we're intentional about helping them determine that path. I was an ED teacher for many years. My kids always wanted to go to the military. I always said the least likely job for some of my students. So again, if they could meet with a military recruiter, if they could really research what it took to be in the military, then they could decide if that truly was the path that was right for them, or if they just, wanted to be big and bad and wanted to go into the military. So again, kids only know what they know about their outcomes. So transition services and activities help us help them determine what that really looks like and means. And then a lot of times that becomes our age-appropriate transition assessment. So you have an example, and I have it right here. So Kelly, I don't know if you were probably ahead of me on that. If you want to attach the transition service and activity example again, that would be awesome. And then we'll have that. So here's just one way this can flow, all right? So again, let's look at the previous year. So the first year for this student, Sabrina wanted to go into the field of retail. So the previous year, she was researching different careers in the area of retail, specifically looking at qualifications. So that was called career exploration. A couple times a year, she could get that done. Her TOR would either help her or just inform that information. And that covered all of these areas. She was also maybe going to job shadow. And so she's going to look at somebody that works in a local retail store so she can better understand what retail looks like. Now, the outcome of both of these things, if I fill out a career exploration sheet and I fill out a job shadow experience form, those become next year's assessments to inform the long-term planning. And if you look at the example I gave you, it is her. It follows all the way through. So now, instead of doing paper pencil assessments, I have these authentic activities that gave me some outcome of some things for me to look at. So then this year, which is on the left side, we come back together. So after she learned more about retail, she wants to look at a college, to look at programs in merchandising. So a college visit. Now, remember, transition activities and services, I just have to inform. Some school personnel always has to be listed under by whom. I don't care if it just says staff, personnel, guidance counselors, TOR, gen ed, but we have to at least inform the activity. I'm not going to take Sabrina on her college visit, but I might provide her mom with the information about how to take a college visit day. Or I might give her mom the information about disability services at different colleges that are in the state of Indiana. So I don't have to make it happen. I just have to inform it. And she's going to make a college visit. She also wants to get a work permit because she wants to get a part-time job. Again, I'm not taking her to get a work permit, but I can help her understand what it takes to get one. Again, you see kind of the path of this. So first I explored it. Now I'm going to explore it a little bit more. And every time we come back to the table, we're having the same conversation, which is, here's where you are, here's where you want to go. What else have you learned that's going to help you make that long-term decision? And all of this, if I just do a little front end, okay, how can I gather that? Just like when you write a goal, how can I gather some of that? If we do a little bit of the front end of that, then we can, like I said, have our age-appropriate assessments done. And the most important thing about this, when it's a better use of our time, but the most important thing is that now Sabrina is really engaged and involved in this transition planning process, not just the recipient of what I answered on my survey. So teachers who are doing it this way and are kind of thinking this process through are truly saying that kids are much more involved now. They're much more engaged in this process. And hopefully the long-term outcome is that I'm informed enough that I'm making a decision that's appropriate for me and meeting some of my long-term goals. So that's that connection with age-appropriate transition assessments and transition services and activities and that whole transition planning process. So let's take a second, and I want you to talk with your group or think yourself. Do you have some questions about this? These are the three things. How do we take our age-appropriate transition assessments and make them more individualized? And that can happen through our services and activities. And again, that cycle, that rotating cycle of this process of planning. So take a couple minutes, post any questions that you have about that before we move on, because those are kind of the big three things that we're seeing in our state that are keeping us from going from compliance to quality. And again, so this is a lot of a quality conversation. So how do we take it that we're really meaningful with that transition planning process and that transition IEP? So I'm going to give you a second to chat and ask any questions. Okay, anybody have anything they want to throw out there? You can always ask me later. Shoot me an email. Before we go on to the next section, I know that, oh, okay. Here's the number one question. What if a student's stated goals are not realistic to their ability? So here's the thing about this. This is why I like the process, is that what it allows us to do is if we do it intentionally and individually, is help a student, again, understand. So if I think I want to be a vet, and you think I don't have the ability, I'm probably on a certificate of completion track maybe, and I'm probably not going to get there. Instead of saying I can't be a vet, we think about activities and services that help me come to a decision about what I could do or what I would do. So maybe you have me explore what it takes to become a veterinarian, and I find, man, I don't want that many years of school. So then maybe my next activity and service is just to talk about what are all the jobs where people work with animals. And so then I look at all the different jobs that people want to work with animals, and then I look at which ones maybe meet my needs. I actually went through this exact process with a young lady, and eventually she ended up working with a dog groomer, which she's still there after many, many years, because she just wanted to pet dogs and brush dogs and bathe dogs and take care of dogs. She didn't really want to be a vet, but what she knew was a vet because they took their dog to a vet. So again, this process helps you get kids kind of to narrow down. And here's the other thing is that sometimes kids can do things we definitely maybe don't think that they can. So they need the opportunity to try it. Transition planning is as much about finding out what I don't want to do as it is about finding what I do want to do. So think about, again, taking kids through the process and helping them explore. I think one of the things we miss in transition planning sometimes too is it's about not just my vocation but my avocation. So maybe I just love that. Maybe I love race car driving or NASCAR, but I'm probably not going to be a race car driver. But that's okay because transition planning is about my interests as well and my preferences. So we want kids to have full lives, and our full lives include more than our work. So how do we help kids then understand that my full life is partially work, but it's also partially, do I know how to recreate? Do I know how to access things in my community? Do I have friends that have similar interests? So that's a great question, because it's okay to talk about more than where I'm going to work and how much education I need. We should be talking about the other things that make me a full individual. So again, let yourself walk through that process. I said, my job is not to be the dream crusher. My job is to help you explore what some of those dreams are. A lot of you, 104 people are signed on, which means there's a lot more than that in the multiple rooms. But a lot of us did not want to be educators when we started, and some of us probably had unrealistic goals. But nobody told us they were unrealistic. They let us figure that out by ourselves. Okay, maybe your parents did. But we got to figure that out. So sometimes we have to let our kids go through that same process. But great question. Okay, I know Kelly's put this multiple times, but if you are logged on and you're in a room with many people, please make sure, I like being an educator, me too. Make sure that you put your name and your email address so we can get you a certificate and also get you some follow-up handouts. So if you haven't done that already, maybe crank that out. And then Kelly, I think I sent you a statement on certificate of completion. If you could put that in the chat box, that would be awesome right now, because we are going to get there in a minute, but then they'll have it. So I want to talk for a second. And before we talk about the certificate, because we're at 10:06, we're going to be done in 24 minutes. I want to talk for a minute about order of selection and pre-employment transition services. You have a handout for each of those things in the handouts that Kelly posted earlier. And again, you can scroll up and find that. We'll also send it as a follow-up. Order of selection. If you are involved with vocational rehabilitation services in your area, order of selection is where the state of Indiana is right now, and that means that only students that meet a level 1 criteria of having the most significant needs or impairments to employment are being accepted, are being eligible for services for voc rehab. So there's a couple of common misconceptions, which is why we added the frequently added questions for you. So hopefully that will help. But this is not saying don't have kids apply to voc rehab. Still have your students apply to voc rehab. That's their determination to make. And also because our definition of a significant disability is not the same as vocational rehabilitation's definition of a significant impairment. So make sure that kids are still applying, but we need to understand that it truly right now is going to be those kids with the most significant needs that are going to be served. Doesn't mean I won't be eligible, but I'll be put on a deferred list if I don't have significant needs. And when more staff is available, more dollars is available, hopefully Indiana will come out of order of selection and kids will be served. But what this means is we have to really, again, be so intentional about our transition planning and connect with as many people as we can in our communities, because we can't fall back on what we've done for many years, which is go to voc rehab, they'll serve you, because that's not necessarily going to happen. So it's important for you to do a couple of things. Have a conversation with your local vocational rehabilitation services counselor. Educate yourself with the handout, and we're going to follow up with some other information. Kelly works with this a lot, so we're going to all work together with this. And also to know that if your students are involved in pre-employment transition services, that actually is going to give them kind of an inroad to vocational rehabilitation services. So before you send a kid to apply for voc rehab, if you have pre-employment transition services happening in your district, make sure that you get that student connected there first. But again, order of selection, I don't have the answers. Jonathan Krasik talked at one of my sessions last week and basically, again, said connect with as many people as you can in your community, your work ones, your workforce development offices, your local businesses, because we don't have exactly the same conduit that we did the past several years. So please download the handout, look at it. We actually are talking about putting together kind of a frequently asked questions for parents on how we can explain to parents better. But again, I don't want us to be saying parents go here, they're going to give you services, when we know that right now that it's more complicated than that. So for order of selection, that's really all we're going to talk about, just giving you that information, making sure you're aware, making sure you connect with the people in your community, so we're all educated about what that is going to look like. The second piece is pre-employment transition services. There's also a handout for that, and right now there are many, many counties in the state of Indiana, more than are even on that list. Jonathan said that that list changes about every day. But what happened is large service providers were allowed to apply for collaborative grant dollars with schools to provide some of the pre-employment transition services that schools really, we were so overwhelmed with all of the other things that we're doing that these things can't always take place. So what pre-employment transition services are, they include the 5 things here: job exploration counseling, work-based learning, post-secondary counseling, workplace readiness, and self-advocacy. So in the handout that I provided for you, on the second page, it gives a list of schools, counties that are being provided services. So the first thing I want you to do is when we're done with this webinar is see if you're on there. See if you should be receiving services from a service provider in your county. If you're listed there and you're not, then follow up. Many of you know already that you are getting pre-employment services. But the reason this is on here partly is because in October, they're going to put out a request for information, basically a pre-proposal that's going to allow anyone else to apply for dollars to provide these pre-employment transition services. So what that means is that if you are in a county that's not being served right now by one of these service providers or within your school district, you will have the opportunity to request dollars to provide these services to your students. Again, this is so critical right now when we know we don't have the full level of vocational rehabilitation services. So I think this is a great opportunity, but here's the thing. I doubt very much that they're going to give 100 separate grants. So if you're in a county that serves several school districts, if you have neighboring districts that you work with, think about who could you collaborate with to possibly request some supports for pre-employment transition services. Now, if you're kind of saying, I have no idea what this is, it looks different every place I go. In some districts, they have somebody coming in and doing self-advocacy classes with kids. In some districts, they have staff people coming in and taking kids out to work-based learning experiences. They do some job exploration. Some places, somebody's coming in and doing all the age-appropriate transition assessments and some of the transition services and activities. So it's really only limited by your needs and your creativity. So now's the time to kind of look around and say, if I could provide better services, transition-wise for my students, what would they look like? And when you see what they would look like or what you think you might like, you will have an opportunity, and Kat says, what's the process to request dollars? What's going to happen is that the request for information, all the information about that is going to come out in October. It will be sent out through our Tuesdays tips. It will be sent out through the director's listserv. It'll be sent out probably every place and any place it can go. So when that happens, that is your opportunity to say, here's the, I don't know what the process is because it comes through vocational rehabilitation services and their partners. But the process will be outlined for us. I just want people to sort of be looking for it to say, here's an opportunity for us to potentially get some additional supports. So again, if you're getting it now, you probably understand it. If you're not, just kind of pay attention when you see the pre-employment transition services pop up somewhere and look at it. We're going to try to make sure we get it in as many hands as we possibly can so you have the opportunity to request for some dollars. Again, we have to take advantage of every opportunity that's out there for us. Thanks for asking that, Kat. Okay, so that's kind of pre-employment. Those are just quick updates of these are happening and these are impacting our transition planning process. And we have to sort of understand what's going on so we're giving accurate information to both our students and their families. Okay, we are now sort of here. Any questions you have? We're not done yet. We're going to do some more. But please put your questions in about the stuff we've talked about so far. What's happening is we are taking the questions from across the state and going to put them in a Q&A. So anything you asked, even on here, even if we talked about it, will go into our Q&A. And then it will come out to you so you can have that. All right, so here's a question. We're told not to fill out VR referrals. We were told we had to refer students to pre-ETS. From there, the pre-ETS person will input the student's data into the VR portal. So here's the thing. If you have pre-employment transition services, if they go that direction first, that will get them an automatic entrance into the VR portal. But if you do not, because we have a lot of counties that don't, you can still, anybody can still refer to VR. What VR counselors have been instructed to do is that the intake meeting they would have with students would become, in essence, their pre-employment transition services activity. Now, if you have pre-ETS, yes, it's better for everybody if they can go through the pre-ETS first, like I said on the one slide, and then slip into VR. If you do not have pre-ETS, you can go directly to VR like you always have, and they will work to make sure that that student kind of jumps through that hoop, okay? And that is directly from Jonathan, and I will clarify that in our Q&A. Do all students with an IEP need to be referred to pre-ETS then so that they can have access to VR down the road? I don't know that I can answer that, but I will put that question to Jonathan and ask him. Again, it depends on what your agreement was with your adult service provider and what the supports look like. But I will make sure that gets put out there to get a better answer than what I'm going to be able to give you. Okay. Again, we'll go through. Kelly's going to save the entire chat box, so we'll have all of that information that we can follow up on. Okay, so if you don't have pre-ets, you're going to see a proposal soon. That's the opportunity to bring that to your area. Okay. All right, we're going to move on because we've got 10 minutes to get through more than 10 minutes worth of work. But the following information, honestly, so much has come out since we put together the presentation that this is a real benefit. So when we talk about putting form to good work, I'm really talking about certificate of completion. People are getting really sort of worried about this, and I want everybody to breathe and know that we are already doing so many of these things. We've just never put shape to a certificate. A certificate of completion up to this point has meant whatever you choose for it to mean in your district. And here's the bottom line for me, is that when I was in the classroom or when I was a director of special ed, one of the hardest conversations was with that family, talking about why your student's not going to get a diploma and what that means. And back in the day, and even up to today, saying that I'm going to get a certificate didn't carry a lot of weight. So the certificate of completion is going to give form to what we are already doing. But what I love about it is when I sit down with a family and they say, well, what does that mean, a certificate? Now I can say that here's what it means. So there's a lot of really current information. In fact, it's just flooding all the time. Steve Yockey from the DOE joined me in my regional on-site tour and did this information. So I'm just going to give some basics so you have some resources to look at, because we need to really be at the table with this talk. We need to be talking to our guidance counselors. We need to be thinking about what this looks like. But I think it's the right thing for us, and it's the right thing by students. But where teachers are kind of getting worried is, oh my gosh, we don't do this. Yes, you do. It's about saying, what do we already do? And is there something we're missing? And if there's something we're missing, how can we make it happen? So, a couple resources for you. If you've not seen it yet, here's the link to the Certificate of Completion Coffee Talk with Pam Wright, who is a Director of Special Education for the state, Nancy Zamitis, and Steve Yockey. It's wonderful. It's about 14 minutes. It really explains what's happening with Certificate of Completion. So make sure that you look at that. I think that Kelly just posted again for us the link, and even I gave her the email. This came out just this morning, and it was really about more information. But this is a wonderful site. Actually, I'm going to see if I can just go to it and share it with you with my desktop. Okay, so here is the Certificate of Completion resource site now. This is way more than what we have in this PowerPoint because, like I said, it's coming out every day. This provides you with the course of study, apply the course descriptions, which is what people are really wanting to look at, what the presentation was to counselors, and it also gives you some examples of four-year plans, which is wonderful. So it says, okay, here's my student. What's it going to look like for this student? Because the whole thing behind this is that it's a combination of what I'm already doing, if I'm getting credits, and what I might be doing, or I've already am doing in terms of what are called units. So Certificate of Completion is really important for us to be at the table and be aware. So I want to go through just a couple things about it. There's two wonderful resources for you. But this presentation, you don't need all of it, but I wanted to make sure you had it. It gives the background about why we got here. And again, this is really important because we didn't have form to certificate prior to this. The law just said a diploma or certificate, but it didn't say what it meant. Here's some important information that they talk about in the Coffee Talk too. From 2015 to 2016, we saw a 5% increase in students who exited with a certificate. Again, even more reason that we have to put some form to a certificate. If you live in my county and you exit with a certificate of completion, you can't get a job at any of the local factories. So how are we going to change that? How are we going to make a certificate have more meat to it? This gives you kind of just the handout of who got a certificate of completion by disability. And I think the important thing here is to say, are there disabilities in here that could have gotten a diploma? You know, were we pushing hard enough? Did we have the right accommodations and the right opportunities? So in that respect, you know, things have changed. All these people, I'm going to click through these, so don't freak out because you'll have this presentation. But again, we've gone from more functional skills to more academic skills. We are getting concerns from both rehab and workforce development about kids who are ready or not ready to enter the workforce. Parents have expressed concerns about what a certificate means. So all these things really caused the Department of Ed to say, we got to put some more into this. So really, those are your things too. So a couple of years ago, this group started. So for 2 years, this group has worked on the certificate. And the best thing about it is it's not just educators, but it includes educators. It's teachers, it's administrators, it's voc rehab, it's workforce development, it's in-source, manufacturers. So really, for one of the first times, I think they brought everybody together and said, okay, what do we need to do here to again, produce a group of kids who are able to meet their post-secondary goals. And one of those goals being absolutely employment. Here are the things, again, the problems we sort of talked about. But here's the position statement, and I want to make sure that we did put this out there. The Department of Ed always supports diploma first. So again, I love that. You know, if I'm capable of earning a high school diploma, I should be given the right instruction and supports to do that. But if I'm going to be removed from that, I should have raised expectations for a certificate. It shouldn't just be, here's the 6 classes you can take because you're not, you know, you're off diploma track. It should be, what's a certificate? What's the meaningful meat behind a certificate of completion? This talks about the process of what's happening. But here's the one thing I wanted to talk about for a second. Part of this is that this course of study for a certificate of completion is going to include a transition portfolio. And it's something, you know, we've had our summary of performance, but I don't know that that's ever turned into something kids go out and it helps them get a job. They're working right now on the transition portfolio and what that will look like. So our kids will leave being able to go to an employer and say, here are the skills that I've acquired. This is what my certificate means. Now, my certificate may not look the same as your certificate, and that's okay. But we need to help kids say, how can I align my long-term goal with this certificate track that I'm on, and how is that helping me build the skills to get a job? So I really like this. It's a work in progress, the certificate, and it's going to take all of us sort of getting on board with it. But I love the fact that kids are going to come out and have something to take forward and say, this is why you should hire me. And I like on the other side of this that we're talking to employers to say, will you do that? You know, I know we say diploma, but what about the student who has this wonderful work history, all these skills, all this training that they've done? Can that student be your employee as well? So those conversations are happening, and they're really critical to our whole transition planning process. This is what the certificate course of study looks like. It's on the page that Kelly sent out and that we just looked at a second ago. So again, just start to wrap your head around it. And again, what a certificate, if you are a teacher of students with significant disabilities, it doesn't mean that your student has to go out and take a data analysis and statistics class. We're talking about that alignment of high expectations with what my needs are. So again, Project Success is working on that and what that looks like. This is just a template. Things are still always going to be identified by the IEP. So it's not, nobody's giving you a pigeonholed plan. We're saying here's a structure, here's a framework, and how do we make this work with what we're providing to our students. So I'm actually really excited about this certificate, and I know that it's scary, but I think it's also, again, what's best for our students. Here's the assumptions that the certificate's making. And again, course selection, bottom one, is driven by the transition IEP. So it's going to be driven by our students' transition IEPs. Like I said, it's just going to help give form to what we're doing. Course descriptions, they are out now, so that's exciting. You can, I haven't even had a chance to pull them up. That email came out this morning, and I haven't even looked at them yet, so I'm excited to dig into course descriptions. So what's next? Pay attention. Me too. Looking for that information. I really think we're going to see a lot of that. They're going to reach out to people about professional development. What do you need? They're revising the summary of performance. They're not just going to have 4-year plans. We're going to talk about 6-year plans. What about kids who maybe could get a diploma if they could stay a little longer, or could get additional supports? And what about our students who stay till they're 22? So all of these are being thought through with, again, a lot of intentionality. But I think this information flow is going to be critical for us to sort of stay involved. Okay, suggestions. They really do want to know what you think. Here are the 3 emails for Steve Yockey, Nancy, and Dr. Wright. If you have a need or you have an idea, please let one of them know, because they're trying to figure out the best path. Oh, we are right at about time. So I just want to take the last couple minutes and talk about resources for a second.
Hey, Joni, we do have a couple questions. Just
okay. Why didn't I stop for that? All right.
The first one we have, I had to scroll up a little bit because we've had a few come in. It's from Annie. What does that, this is for pre-ed, so we're going back a little bit.
Okay.
What does that look like for online students that serve students in multiple counties?
Okay.
I think that's talking about like when we're referring them.
Online schools. Oh, for pre-eds. Oh, that's a really good question. I have not talked a lot about online schools with the pre-employment transition people, but you know what, Annie? I'm going to put that out to Jonathan because he'll want to think about that. And when we were in Indy, we had a lot of folks from charter schools and not virtual schools at the trainings. So I can't answer it, but we will talk about. I'm assuming that the opportunity to apply for the dollars that come out would be yours as well. I think it's for anybody. So think about how you could support maybe your online students in the area of the pre-employment transition services. But let me see if we can get some clarification on that, because somebody probably knows better than I.
Okay, great. The next question is, could you share some thoughts on what would need to be included in the course of study section? Do we discuss credit requirements for the selected diploma, or do we simply state something like parent was given handout on Core 40 requirements?
You know what, Steve? I think that they are working with the IEP Resource Center on what that would look like, because I'm assuming you're meeting with the certificate, what the course of study would look like. But I know they're having the conversation about how that would be articulated to families. Again, I'm probably going to have more I don't know answers on that, but your questions are what we'll take forward so we can get some answers.
Okay, the next question is, I'm unsure of the transition portfolio requirement. Is this something that will eventually be a requirement, or is it a requirement now?
It is not a requirement now. Right now, the requirement for students exiting is a summary of performance. The transition portfolio will be part of the new certificate of completion, which will be it doesn't start until the incoming group next year, so it won't be until like 2020 that you have that requirement. Everybody else will be grandfathered in. Actually, the requirements aren't out there, and it's not there yet. It's coming. It's coming as part of that whole certificate of completion. Applied units, I see that one.
Mm-hmm.
Applied units are basically instead of, I can either get credits or applied units. And applied units are, here's what I'm teaching in my class, and it might be my self-contained class, it might be I'm out in a gen ed class and I'm taking it, but not for credit, I'm taking it for applied units instead. So it's going to be broad. If you, like I said, I want to pull up and look at some of their examples, so that will help. But it's kind of like, if I'm not, I can take credits, I can get credits, or I can get applied units. It's what we're going to call now courses that kids are taking on a certificate track that aren't credit-bearing courses. So I have to get so many applied units in different areas. Course descriptions are at the site that Kelly gave you the link to, the DOE site. There are some course descriptions available. And yes, Amy, thank you very much. Oh, Miss Amy Howie's on here. So again, I hope I answered that right. They're similar to credits earned for a diploma, but they're applied units. If you don't work with Amy Howie or Meredith, they work for Project Success. And like I said, they are making this alignment. So this is I have lots of questions, but we're going to get there with lots of answers. Yes, they are not your credits. They would be your applied units earned in a functional math or a reading class. Okay, thank you, Amy, for your, okay. Okay, great. So let's kind of talk about resources for a second, and then I'm gonna let everybody get back to your world today. What else do you need? We are always looking for what supports do you need? What supports do you need for your transition planning? What supports do you need for writing compliant and quality transition IEPs? So please let me know what that might look like. And then we listed multiple resources for you on the next couple of pages of this. So if you do not get Tuesday's tips, which is at the very top, you want to make sure that you email SK Harris and get that. You will find lots of information about upcoming things, including, you know, we'll pass along all the certificate information, we'll pass along the pre-ETS information through Tuesday's tips. So if you don't get that resource, please, please log on or email her and she'll add you to the list. If you do not currently use the transition matrix, it is listed there. That is where you can find authentic assessments for many of your activities, as well as other assessments to support your students. So there's just a couple of pages of information here. Again, final reminders. If you didn't put your name and email in the chat box, please do that. You'll get a certificate of completion. And if you would, we would really be grateful if you took a couple seconds and did the survey to let us know what we need to do differently or what we can add to trainings. If you would like a webinar for new teachers, please let us know, because I think that's something that might be coming. And hopefully we'll support your teachers who are just starting out. But Kelly posted again the PowerPoint. Thank you so much for hanging out with me for 90 minutes. Kelly, thanks for monitoring everything for me. I really appreciate it. You'll get some follow-up as well. So we're going to do a Q&A, and that will come out to you. So thanks for coming. Shoot any last-minute questions, and have a great rest of the day.
Hey, Joni, if you want to stay on for a minute.
I will. I'm going to stop